Hello, welcome to today's show. I'm Jacqueline Stockwell, CEO and founder at Leadership Through Data. I inspire and motivate information leaders across the world.
Hello and welcome to today's show. I'm so excited to have Laura in the studio with me today. Laura, do you want to introduce yourself and tell me something that you do outside of work that's you?
Okay. Hello, Jacqueline. Thanks so much for having me. I was really excited to be here today. So a bit about me. So my company is called Data Privacy Expert. It really helps with Google AdWords, to be honest. I don't consider myself, the expert, but it does help. I didn't used to be in data protection my whole life. I actually spent most of my life working in hospitality and then working my way up. Then I was running pubs and bars. I was a HR manager, compliance manager. I kind of fell into data protection just before COVID. But I think what it has given me, although it's strange to change careers in your mid-30s and quite scary, what it has given me is quite a unique edge in that whenever I speak to clients, I always understand the operational side and the people side. And I know you also have a business to run. They do really appreciate that. I am somebody who always questions everything, why we're doing things the way we're doing them, because I feel if we don't ask the question and we're not willing to make changes or question if what we're doing is right, we'll never implement any sort of change. So when I was younger as a teenager, I didn't quite like the rules back then with my parents and the whole situation. So I decided to pack my bag and leave and run away from home.
Okay.
Came to the UK. Really worked hard in the industry, and that's kind of how I guess although I grew up in Germany and my parents are Italian, I feel really British because this is where I spent most of my life, and kind of raised myself from then on, if that makes sense. Again, when COVID hit, or just before COVID, I was a compliance manager, and naturally, my boss was like, "Oh yeah, you do HR and compliance. Here's GDPR." I was like, "Oh my God." And to be honest, when I was introduced to GDPR, I thought it was the worst thing in the world. I was like, oh my God, why would I want to do that? And then throughout COVID, I actually worked with my sister, who's also got her own consultancy. I freelance for her now, but she's really who inspired me to do this. And I just did a complete 360 turn or 180. My math is terrible. I love it. I'm so passionate about it because I understand the people side of things. And to be honest, I could talk to people all day about it.
Amazing. And I'm loving some of those. I'm going to sort of feed in a little bit there and ask you some more questions. But what do you do outside of work? Tell me
Yeah, that
about
you did
Laura.
ask that. I am terrible at sticking to the point. I am a self-defense instructor for children and adults. So in a way, by day I help people to protect themselves physically, and no, that's by night, and then by day, data protection.
Wow. And how often do you do that? Is it like a daily thing or?
No, not a daily. So it's a couple of times a week in the evenings. And then I used to do children on a Saturday. My partner is actually the chief instructor because I'm a bit more busy with work now. I do it a little bit more occasionally. But I'm still heavily involved.
Love that. And you can't underestimate self-defense as well. So
No,
and
it's
I
needed.
love the fact that you protect information by day, but you also protect people from information by day as well. And then you do that other thing. So I think that's great. And what I found really interesting about your story is that you started in hospitality. So I've spoken to a lot of people on this podcast, and they've all come from different backgrounds and different journeys in hospitality as well.
Did you?
Yeah, so I done the bars and the restaurants and the, stuff in London. So yeah, it's really interesting. But I think that's where we get our people attachment from. So you take the people attachment, you then go sort of like kind of back office, as you just talked about compliance, didn't you, in HR, but they're still related to people and now information. And I'm very much for the people, and that's why we've got here today, haven't we? So you say data protection is about people and trust, not just rules. So can you explain that simply for me?
Yes. And I think an analogy, I always use analogies from being a child, or I use my daughter as example. And I think fundamentally humans don't like to follow rules, right? I think it's just in us. We're worse as children than we are as adults because we sort of learn that's how we must behave. But if we can't relate to it and if we can't understand it, then it is just that. It's just a set of rules. And I think rules on their own don't build trust. What builds trust is behavior. And behavior can only change when people understand why we need to do something. So whenever my daughter's like, oh, why have I got to do that? Or why do I need to do that? Same in organizations. Oh no, why are you trying to prevent me from running my business? That's how they feel about it. But when you explain why it matters and how it makes their lives easier, how it builds trust with their customers, I think that's when you make things human. And that's what shapes how I work. So I don't walk in with a rule book. I help people understand their options. I also don't say, you must do this, you can't do this. I say, look, these are the rules. And sorry, that's my dog in the background. I'm so sorry about that.
You're good. I can get rid of it. It's fine. Keep going. I can
So
get rid
I
of the
help people
background noise.
understand their options, and I empower them by saying, you make the decision. I give you all the information you need, and then you make a decision, as long as it's lawful. And I think when you work like that, people stop seeing data protection as a blocker, and they start seeing it as something that helps them as an organization, but also their service users.
Yeah, and I think you kind of articulated that really beautifully, because you said when you first started for GDPR, you didn't like it. I remember when I was in the National Health Service and it came in and I got given a textbook, and I'm like, oh my God, like a textbook. Like, what do I do with this textbook? Like, you have to learn it. And it can be overwhelming. But if you're using your simplified approach and actually explaining the simplicities of it to people, it's having that understanding that this is the outcome if you don't comply, but actually this is what we can do to work you towards compliance. So I think that's really good. And at the end of the day, you want the laws to be useful and easy to remember. So what's one data protection rule companies often struggle with, and how can you make it simple for employees?
Well, I would actually start with the first principle of data protection. I would go with lawfulness, fairness, and transparency. And I think actually fairness is the forgotten principle. And I think that's what happens when you combine three principles. They kind of understand the lawfulness part because it's logical. Okay, we must have a lawful basis. They kind of understand the transparency part, but they start getting lost when they're like, what information do we need to give people? How do we do it? But then it's also the fairness part. And I think because they're not that measurable, right? Lawfulness is very easy, lawful basis and whatever. But then the other thing is more, again, it comes down to human side of things, to common sense. So how I tackle it is by saying, ask yourself three questions. Would you be happy if somebody did that with your information? Would you feel it was fair? And would you be comfortable explaining it to them? And that's kind of, if the answer is no, then you've got to work on it. And I think that's how I managed to make it relatable. And then we go through it. I had an example. I was teaching a group of HR professionals, and they asked me the question. They said, oh, should we be asking people what salary they're currently on in order to establish what salary we're going to give them? And I said, well, does that seem fair to you? And she said, well, how do we know what to pay them? And so it requires a fundamental change in thinking as well, because a salary is associated with a job, right? Not what somebody is currently on. So, but I love having these little conversations because you can see their faces go, oh, yeah, no, we need to change that. And that's what keeps me going.
Amazing. And I think relationships and trust is key there, isn't it? It's and they're really big things to keep to keep it moving forward. So when data breaches happen, what is the most important thing a company can do to keep customers' trust?
When it comes to data breaches, I think it's hold up your hands and be honest. A lot of times even when I consult for others and I say, oh, well, I would encourage them to apologize, people are always like, oh, no, don't do that because you sort of, you'll be held liable. And I was like, but to me, I would say if you make a mistake, tell people about it, be honest and open. The rule of, oh, well, the ICO says we must not report a data breach every time. Well, okay, that's fine, but it doesn't mean you can't. And of course, you have to strike a balance. But I think sometimes it feels like we're using a law and rules as a way to avoid making decisions that are just human. And I think if you are honest and say, we made a mistake, this is what we're doing to avoid bad things from happening, to mitigate the risk from it happening again, I think that's when people trust you.
And I think there's a really big thing, there's a big disconnect between, I call them magic mistakes, because I think when something happens, there's always a learning and there's a growth opportunity from them. And if you actually share them, other people can learn from those mistakes and ensure it doesn't happen again. And there's loads of that in the entrepreneurial world about sharing your mistakes. When you set up a business, you don't do the same thing. And know they're different areas, but the same principle applies in my view, that we should embrace our mistakes and say hands up. But there is a real culture thing as well. A culture shift within organizations is around blame culture, isn't there, when it comes to, and that's quite a hard thing to get over, I definitely think, within organizations.
I agree. And I think, when staff are too scared to tell you about a data breach, or they're worried about their jobs because they made a mistake, then you've got a real big problem there. And you need to change that culture, because people should be able to tell you. It's again the analogy with my daughter. I'd much rather she tells me her mistakes, and I'll sort of compose myself even if I'm really upset. But then at least I know, because if you don't know when things are happening, how are you meant to mitigate any risks?
Yeah, agreed. And I always say to my daughter, "And what did you learn from it?" And she's like, "Mummy," like she gets to a point of like, "Oh, they're magic mistakes. What did you learn from it?" She's like, "I'm not doing that right now." That's kind of this way she falls at me. So I want to talk about AI because it's everywhere. It's all we're talking about in our industry right now. AI and privacy go hand in hand. What do you think is the biggest ethical problem companies face when using AI?
I think naturally everybody is going to say biased, AI making biased decision, but I actually think the biggest ethical problem with AI isn't always the technology itself. I think if it's used correctly, it can be really, really useful. I'm a big advocate of it, but it doesn't mean that I agree with everything everybody does with it. And where I see it is that too often organizations don't ask the right questions. And again, this is not just AI related, it is privacy in general. But I see it all the time. Data protection impact assessments being completed after a project has already started. And whilst I understand that sometimes we have to do something retrospectively because it's better to do it than not to have it, but to then take the approach of, oh, yeah, we'll do this and we'll ask questions later. This is not what risk assessments are about, right? That's what a data protection impact assessment is a risk assessment. This is what you base your decisions on, whether it is lawful, whether it is right. So the other day I reviewed a DPRA, and they've done a great job on it. Of course, naturally, they were already doing it anyway. Great. But one of the statements said, patient data is truly anonymized. And that was it. And I'm like, okay, but how do you know that? How are you doing it? Can you evidence it? And is it truly anonymized? So there's some real questions that you need to ask. So I think you really need to ask questions, have all the answers so that you can evidence really what happens to your information, where it goes, and again, be honest and transparent about it. So we don't need to stop innovation, I don't think. We need to understand it. And it's about curiosity, accountability, and just being honest. So I think we need to make sure that AI stays a helper rather than starting to sort of rule us, right?
Yeah, 100%. And I think you've looked at that from an innovation perspective, because AI does help with innovation. And I really like it. I'm dyslexic, so it helps me in my everyday work, and I'm, hugely grateful for that. But then you've also got to make sure that the organizational level is, compliant and secure with some of the things in there. But it also goes back to GDPR, isn't it? It's about getting rid of stuff, making sure you're looking after your information. So they're all intertwined, because, AI is only as good as the information that it's working on inside the
Absolutely.
systems. So there's a big wide question, this one for you. So do you think the old privacy laws like GDPR still work well enough for AI, or do we need to do something else?
So if we're talking just privacy, I think GDPR is more than enough, because it gives us the principles. I mean, it has all the fundamental principles there. It's got fairness, it's got transparency, it got accountability, and in fact, it was already enough before, in my opinion, before the Data Use and Access Act came in. It just gives us a bit more, but technically it's not a fundamental change in how we were meant to treat data. So I think GDPR laws, privacy laws are enough, but I think organizations will need help to understand how to apply it to AI, because it's the same as GDPR. It came in 2018. Nobody knew what they were doing. Only now are we starting to, really, really see people, taking it more and more seriously. So I think it is the same. I think organizations will need a bit more help in order to apply GDPR. But I also think that we probably do need some AI laws like the AI Act. I don't agree with the approach in the UK where we say, oh, we are going to take a common sense approach, because, I mean, look where common sense got us, essentially. So I think no. So, but in order to, it is something that has to be regulated, right? So in order to regulate something, surely there must be a regulation for it, to make sure that humans stay in charge. So I do think there is a scope for some sort of law to regulate AI.
And I think sort of a question for you would be, you talked earlier around DPIAs being filled out, like when things are already happening. Do you think that information leaders, so I call everyone information leaders, and that's privacy, anybody that works with information, records management, information leader. Do you think that there is a real thing for us as people that we're not actually being proactive so much within the organisation, saying like getting ourselves involved in projects, like what's happening, or, you know, going to board meetings, because we're so busy with the reactive stuff. But what happens if we could flip it on its head, and really start to sort of like drive our influence as people within the business, you know, increase our profiles, increase the awareness of actually the amazing jobs that we do within the business, so we could be more proactive. So we're always ahead of that for the DPIAs, for example, is what we're talking about, rather than the reactive approach. Do you think that the disconnect is for us as information leaders, or do you think it's something else?
I think it depends whether, you know, we work within an organization or we have a consultancy. So I think the relationship can be a bit different. When you work within an organization, people generally don't like what you do. When you're a consultant, people pay you to do what you're doing. So I think there is if that makes sense. So when you work in an organization, of course, you also get paid for it, but because it just feels a bit more lonely. I think people that work as DPOs, information leaders, as an employee, I think they have it possibly a little worse in that aspect. So they need to make sure that from the very beginning that they have the tools that they need to do their jobs. It's not nice to be given the responsibility, but then not be given the tools, not be given the responsibility, not be involved at the very beginning when it comes to procurement, starting projects. But across the board, I think just understanding information regulation and laws isn't enough. I think we need to equip ourselves with more tools and training in regards to leadership, culture, people, because in order to get information governance right, I think it starts with culture. If the culture isn't there, if the buy-in isn't there, you're fighting a losing battle. It just becomes paperwork and dull, quite frankly. It is just dull, it's boring, because nobody wants this. Even us as information we don't like paperwork. We want to be there talking to people. We want to talk about our passion. We want to make sure that everybody understands what we're trying to do. So I would say, if you're doing one thing, maybe ditch the Dell. I'm going to continue using it. Just get rid of it all. Just be there, be present, talk to people, have the conversation.
And really define your soft skills as people.
Yes,
okay?
absolutely.
You know, absolutely, as an information leader, if you've been in it a long time, you know the compliance, the laws, the regulations, but it's that softer skill that can really, you know, focus your personal and professional development on those skills, which will actually enhance your role going forward.
I think so.
Amazing. So one final question from me, and I want to just talk about small businesses, so startup business. What is so it's just a startup business, they've started to collect customer names and emails. What is the single most important piece of advice you could give them to avoid any problems?
I would say map out what you're doing and what information you collect, but of all stakeholders. So a bit of stakeholder mapping, a bit of, okay, these are the people we're dealing with. This is the information we collect. I think that's most important, because another thing that happens a lot, we just tend to forget about our employees. We do all the right things. We just forget that we have this whole department where we've got the most sensitive information. And I don't think organizations mean to do it. It just happens. So I think map out who your stakeholders are, map out the information you collect and the purpose, and then be transparent and honest, and then work your way through all the other principles. But also really analyze, you know, first of all, I think organizations also need to have, you know, there's so many things. They need to have a risk appetite. You need to understand what the organization is trying to achieve. What's your priority as an organization? And this is the language you need to speak in your privacy notices, in your policies, and challenge what a policy is and what it isn't, and what you're trying to achieve with it. Because if they're too long, if you have too many, nobody will read them. And that just means nobody's going to do what they're meant to.
Yeah. And I think from a startup perspective, it's just drawing a picture, really, isn't it? It's like, where is everyone sit? Where does the information go? What do we collect? And then you can work all the other stuff that you just said around the edges. So I think that's great.
Absolutely.
Amazing, Laura. Super podcast today. Thank you very much for your time. How can listeners reach out to you if they want to know any more?
So, well, my name is just down here. They can just look me up on LinkedIn. It's just my name. I've got a website, but I'm in the process of changing it, taking on board all the advice I've spoken about today, because I got bored of my website, my privacy notice. That happens about 3 times a year. So expect a brand new me. But for now, it's dataprivacyexpert.co.uk. And all my contact details are on there as well.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for your time. You've been an absolute
Thank you
great
so much.
guest on the
And that was really
show.
fun.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Journals of the Information Entrepreneur with me, Jacqueline Stockwell. I hope you found this episode inspiring and helpful and have some takeaway tips that can be useful to you. If you liked this episode, please like, review and share it with your friends. Your support helps us reach more information leaders to stay inspired and listen to great content. Want to test out your strengths and weaknesses and measure it against our Empower framework? Please complete the scorecard. It's a great way to improve and evaluate your skills. You can find the scorecard at the end of the description of this podcast. Stay tuned for a new podcast every Thursday, and remember to be bold, be brave and be beautiful.